All right, and welcome back. We are now on to episode number 8. We're going to continue in this series, The Invisible Enemy, COVID-19, call it the China virus, call it whatever you want. We are looking here at the early days of COVID-19, going through those as quickly or as slowly as we can, trying to get into everything that I have here in this book, 174 pages of just notes and data. You can find that on my website at whatistruth911.wordpress.com, and it should pop right up. So any new shows that we have and anything new should pop right up in that article. I'll be adding to that article, so make sure if you look for anything new, you can reference it right there if you just want to make sure, or send somebody the link of all of the different shows in just one place. So that's kind of what I like about having a WordPress site also. So to make it easy for people who just want the research, you can download all the stuff we're going to talk about. What I screen share here, you'll be able to download all of that. So with that said, let's go ahead and get right into this next episode. All right, so here we go. We are still on April 10th of 2020, Good Friday, 2020. A study for the Center for Disease Control and Prevention titled Aerosol and Surface Distribution on Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2 in Hospital Wards, Wuhan, China, 2020. This was published on April 10th. Oh, that's a long run-on sentence, but that's okay. Sometimes you got to do that just because you want to get the most data in there. But that sentence is a mouthful, but it's because of the article is so long. So make sure that you check out that article where they're talking about the aerosol and surface distribution to severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2 in the hospital wards in Wuhan, China, 2020. So, several news articles cited the story with the headline focusing on how COVID-19 could spread on the soles of your shoes. This was an interesting article, actually, because, first it's like, well, it can't spread human to human. That's what the World Health Organization was telling us. Now we learned that it can actually spread in the soles of your shoes. So, the reasons things like this always make, these are things that kind of stuck in my head as we learned more and as people were telling us we need to wear masks. Wearing the mask for 2 weeks is going to help. And well, if it's on your shoes, I don't know, how much of that is really going to help. But anyways, and we can see it has not stopped the coronavirus. Everything we've been doing for 2 years, it feels like, flatten the curve and everything. But what are you going to do for your shoes? So if the COVID can get on the soles of your shoes, the masks, that's just more proof that the masks are not as effective. They may be somewhat effective, but not something that we should be mandating or making sure everybody does, because it just doesn't work like that, according to what this article is saying here. Good article. I'm sure I have it too. What I should do, thinking about that with this series, on the website, I'll start adding the PDFs too. So maybe that will help people if you want to go and read this actual study, because this study was referenced in several articles that I found. So I did have to rummage through certain articles to get to the actual study. So hopefully I have that, and hopefully I'll be able to download that. But you can look up the title, and it's definitely worth reading. Okay, let's read on. So here's what the study says. Half of the samples from the soles of the ICU medical staff shoes tested positive. So shoes are testing positive, the study concluded. Therefore, the soles of medical staff shoes might function as carriers. The 3-week positive results from the floor of dressing room 4 might also arise from these carriers. We highly recommend that persons disinfect shoe soles before walking out of wards containing COVID-19 patients. So this is where it goes, okay, if it was true then, shouldn't it be true now? If it can spread on the soles and we're walking around with masks on, acting like that's going to save us, articles like this, studies like this that are very, not referenced by a lot of the people who want you to wear masks and get the shot and all that stuff. These are some of the things that they're not going to mention. So I thought it was very important to put this into this paper notes document, future book, basically, because everything we're reading here will at some point be edited down and made into a real book that hopefully will again help people, especially once things go down the memory hole. Hopefully, this will be something that we can always reference back to um, if needed, if wanted. The study took place in hospital wards in Wuhan, China between February 19th and March 2nd of 2020. The purpose of the study was to determine distribution of severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2 in hospital wards in Wuhan, China. According to the study, we tested air and surface samples. Contamination was greater in intensive care units than general wards. Virus was widely distributed on floors, computer mice, trash cans, and sickbed handrails, and was detected in air for and from patients. Pretty interesting stuff there. And I do hope to get my friend Catherine on at some point to kind of help me go through some of the stuff because she was one of the first people when I was just learning about what COVID-19 was and had no idea what COVID-19 really was. Catherine was one of the persons that I asked, what is this? What is, I didn't know what a coronavirus was and how it connected to all these other things that we have going on here. And then the 19, what does the 19 mean? Does this mean this is the 19th version of COVID? So, and she helped me out. She laughed at it and we laughed. It was, it's just something that I would ask. I have no, I don't really care if I'm wrong. I don't really care if I don't know something, if I ask stupid questions. I like to just ask people questions, things like that, to try to figure out what it is. So half kidding, half joking, but really seriously, because I had no idea what COVID-19 was at the time and still kind of struggling. But I've been reading a great book called The Real Anthony Fauci by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Highly recommend it for everyone. Even if you know everything about COVID and all that stuff, it's more about AIDS, like the pharma, big pharma. Like this is a must read for everybody, I think. So it was a really good book, and I hope more people will take the time to actually read this book. I found it very insightful and very helpful, actually, to a lot of the research that I've been doing. So I do hope that it helps you out too. All right, let's get back into it. All right, so what I did is I tried to include some of the stuff that was in that CDC report again, because you just never know when things are going to get wiped off, wiped out, and or just shadow banned where people can't have access to it. So that was another big reason to write this book. With anything you think is a false flag or anything you think is a pandemic or a tragedy, it's really important, and I'm sure most of you know this here, to get as much data as you can and to document that data, to back up that data, store it offline if at all possible, print it out, but to have that data in case things like this get shoved down the memory hole. And so that was some of the reasons why I was so adamant about trying to write this book in real time at that time. And a lot of this was when I started this, it was, March. And from that point on, a lot of stuff you're reading now is probably me writing it that day. And at some point going back over, I think I only edited like the first 70 or 80 pages or something. So at some point, the data we're reading here is going to get a little more convoluted. We'll see. So I won't read this, but you can definitely go and check some of that out. I think it's definitely worth reading, especially if you're interested in the SARS-CoV-2, CoV-2, and whether, some of it's saying whether it can be transmitted by aerosol remains controversial, and the exposure risk for close contact has not been systematically evaluated. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. book, it also said that, if somebody says that the science is definite, the science is settled, he says never take that at their word, because that's not what science is. Science is always being questioned, always being challenged, and continual stuff. So anyways, I've learned a lot just by reading that book, and I look forward, I'm about maybe not even halfway through it yet, and so much data. It's definitely a book that I'm going to read over and over again, and it really helped me understand a lot of the stuff that I didn't know about Dr. Fauci, obviously, and a lot of the things that we're kind of talking about here. So The study that they did was performed in a small sample of regions with few confirmed cases. So there weren't that many confirmed cases, and they were finding COVID was testing positive on the shoes. It's pretty interesting stuff, I think. I think it's very interesting in Wuhan, China, which is where a lot of people believe that this all started from. So in the study, we tested surface and air samples from an intensive care unit and a general COVID ward and I can't pronounce the name, but in a hospital in Wuhan, China. And there's the actual name there, HUOSHENSHAN. And then there's a map. They even have a nice little map there from February 19th to March 2nd. Let's see, February 19th to March 2nd. How can I get out of there? There you go. We collected swab samples from potentially contaminated objects in the ICU and GW as described previously. The ICU housed 15 patients with severe disease and the GW housed 24 patients with milder. So then it goes through all that, what they sampled and air samples, how they collected them. Pretty interesting study. So there's all of the results and you can read all of that. I'm glad I put that directly into this book here too, because obviously it was very important. A lot of it is probably beyond my understanding, but people who know about this stuff, who know about COVID, know about the samples and the tests and all the stuff that you would want to do to find out. This looks like a very thorough study. So we'll read that now. Getting to the conclusions. The study was led into three conclusions. First, SARS-CoV-19 was widely distributed in the air and on subject surfaces in both ICU and GW. So it's in the air, it's on surfaces, it's everywhere, implying a potentially high infection risk for medical staff and other close contacts. Second, the environmental contamination was greater in the ICU than in the GW, the general ward. Thus, stricter protective measures should be taken by medical staff working in the ICU. Third, the SARS-CoV-2 aerosol distribution characteristics in the ICU indicate that the transmission distance of SARS-CoV-2 might be 4 m. And this is interesting. As of March 30th, no staff members had been infected, indicating that appropriate precautions could effectively prevent infection. In addition, our findings suggested that home isolation of persons with suspected COVID-19 might not be a good control strategy. That's an interesting point right there. I'll read that again, that their findings suggest that home isolation of persons with suspected COVID-19 might not be a good control strategy. Family members usually do not have personal protective equipment and lack professional training, which easily leads to familiar cluster infections. So they don't want them at home. They want them in hospitals. Pretty interesting. During the outbreak, the government of China strove to the fullest extent possible to isolate all patients with suspected COVID-19 by actions such as constructing mobile cabin hospitals in Wuhan, quarantine zones, which ensured that all patients with suspected disease were cared for by professional medical staff and that virus transmission was effectively cut off. As of the end of March, the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic in China had been well controlled. Our study has two limitations. That's pretty interesting because we see how low the Chinese numbers are, how even back then, how low they were. And this study here has some good stuff, but the study also is saying China was able to control it and quarantine themselves, et cetera, et cetera. So why would they care if, why would it be such a big deal if Trump cut off flight restrictions, right? If he created flight restrictions for to China, to and from China and all that stuff. And then the repatriation, we talked about that, getting people back here and everything, but stopping flights, things like that. And Trump got some flack for that, but it just seemed like by people that were just looking for something. They were looking for something to blame Trump for. So our study has two limitations. First, the results of the nucleic acid test do not indicate the amount of viable virus. Second, for the unknown minimal infectious dose, the aerosol transmission distance cannot be strictly determined. Overall, we found that the air and object surface in COVID-19 wards were widely contaminated by SARS-CoV-2 COVID-2. These findings can be used to improve safety practices. So there is the actual link to the article. Hopefully it's still active. www.nc.cdc.gov, and then a lot of backslash EID, backslash article, backslash 26, backslash 7, backslash 20-0885, and then article. So pretty interesting article there. And I hope that that is one that really helps in our research, that helps us to kind of get to the, to the understanding of what they were doing, some of the tests they were doing, finding it on the shoes testing positive. It's pretty interesting to me. All right, so let's go to the Passover message from President Trump. He and his wife joined millions of Christians celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the gift of eternal life in Easter. So this is a big deal, obviously, for us Christians. It's nice to hear a president talk about this, talk about the one true God. And this is how he kind of began that speech there. And I thought it was a really good speech, very uplifting, very powerful, not this dark winter that we've been hearing about all the time, that we continue to hear about under the current president. But yes, nothing about fear, all about Jesus Christ. That's where everything is. All this stuff is very temporary. Everything that we're going through, these are temporary problems. So it's nice to have the president kind of recognize that it's not all doom and gloom. Put your trust in Jesus Christ and everything will be all right. Okay, so as we head on to April 12th, the rising numbers. As of April 12th, 2020, there were 1,314,269 active cases. There were 537,465 closed cases worldwide. This was so important for me. These numbers were so important for me to include. On Facebook, we were hearing a lot of the negative, the deaths, this and that. But somebody wrote on Facebook, what about the closed cases? What about the recoveries? And so that kind of made me want to make sure that I put all of that data into this book here to show that, you talk about the active cases. But we can't just focus on the active cases and then associate them subconsciously, like I was doing with death. We have the active cases, we have the recoveries, we have the closed cases, and then we have the deaths. So all of that stuff is just as valuable. Thankfully, that person posted that. It triggered my brain to remember that, yeah, don't just focus on how many people are dying. Okay, focus on the cases, the whole thing, the whole picture, the active cases, the recoveries, and then the closed cases, basically. So, and of course, don't forget about the deaths either. But all right, so let's get back into it here. So those were the active and the closed cases. Of those closed cases, 423,268 people had recovered from COVID-19, and 114,179 had died. So those were the deaths at that point, 114,000. In the United States, as of April 13th, we had a total of 560,433 confirmed cases, with 22,115 deaths and 32,634 recoveries. By April 13, 2020, there was at least one reported death in all 50 states. Worldwide, there were a reported number of 1,920,142 cases, just about 2 million cases there. Worldwide. They were expecting that just within our country. We know that did not happen at that time, right? And then we have a lot of false positives and all these other things that are happening now. But just then, what they were expecting were 2 million deaths, 2 million cases. But I think of 2 million deaths, if I remember correctly, not cases. They were looking at deaths there. And you can compare that to what we have here. Of those reported cases, so of the 1.9 million cases, the number of deaths reached 119,410, while 443,732 have recovered from COVID-19 across the globe. In total, there were 563,142 closed cases. In total, there were 585,469 confirmed cases in the United States, with 59,797 closed cases. Of those closed cases, there were 23,592 deaths and 36,205 people who recovered from COVID-19. We did the right thing, President Trump said during the April 13th press briefing. America is continuing to make critical progress in our war against the virus, President Trump stated. Over the weekend, the number of daily new infections remained flat nationwide. Flat. Hospitalizations are slowing in hotspots like in New York, New Jersey, Michigan, and Louisiana. This is clear evidence that our aggressive strategy to combat the virus is working and that Americans are following the guidelines. It's been incredible what they've done. During the briefing, Dr. Fauci also addressed a CNN interview from the previous day. I had an interview yesterday that I was asked a hypothetical question, Dr. Fauci began, and hypothetical questions sometimes can get you into some difficulty because it's what would have or could have. The nature of the hypothetical question was, if, in fact, we had mitigated earlier, could lives have been saved? And the answer to my question was, as I always do, and I'm doing right now, perfectly honestly say yes. I mean, obviously. So if the mitigation works and you instigated and you initiated earlier, you will probably have saved more lives. If you initiated it later, you probably would have lost more lives if you initiated at a certain time. That was taken as a way that maybe somehow something was at fault here. The first and only time that Dr. Birx and I went in and formally made a recommendation to the president, Dr. Fauci continued, to actually have a, quote, shutdown in the sense, not really shutdown, but to really have strong mitigation, we discussed it. Obviously, there would be concern by some that, in fact, that might have some negative consequences. Nonetheless, the president listened to the recommendation and went to the mitigation. The next second time that I went with Dr. Birx and the president to the president and said 15 days are not enough. We need to go 30 days. Obviously, there were people who had a problem with that because of the potential secondary effects. Nonetheless, at that time, the president went with the health recommendations and we extended it another 30 days. So I can only tell you what I know and what my recommendations were. But clearly, as happens all the time, there were interpretations of that response to a hypothetical question that I just thought it would be very nice for me to clarify because I didn't have the chance to clarify. Thank you. So I don't know if you want to call it a backtrack, but it is weird. I mean, that's a CNN trait, asking the hypothetical, oh, should we have done this? But it's nothing that President Trump wasn't being asked during these press conferences. It was always about what could you have done better? And I mean, to think that a person would not think about what they could have done better, et cetera, which is fine. There's going to be plenty of time to think about that. But while they're in it, it's like they're too busy thinking about what to do at that point. So some weird stuff there, but this is kind of one of the first breaks that I saw between the president and Dr. Fauci and Birx and Dr. Birx, because you're going to see less and less of Dr. Fauci and of Dr. Birx as time goes on, which is interesting. I didn't really understand why then, but I have some guesses now, obviously, why they were kind of being let out, kind of shut down after kind of, going against the president, I would say, and some of the criticisms. But again, I had no idea who Dr. Fauci and who Dr. Birx were at that time. Had I known, maybe I would have listened to some people who were trying to tell me who they were. I think this is really good to get into as well. The visible timeline, with the criticism, whatever was happening, you can tell Trump was kind of eager to make sure, and not just him too, obviously his team, his staff were eager to make sure everybody kind of understood that what this timeline was, because they're probably hearing from the Trump haters, from websites that don't like Trump, and everything he did wrong. And that's basically it. So this is where you get to hear the other side of all of that. So here we go. Trump then gave a timeline of events starting on January 6, 2020. On January 6, President Trump stated, CDC issued a travel notice for Wuhan, China, a notice before there was even a confirmed case of the virus in the United States. So he's saying on January 6, 2020, CDC issued a travel notice for Wuhan, China. These are some of the things. Well, what could you have done more, right? So when you hear like Dr. Fauci, his the question is kind of crap, but his answer is also kind of crap too. But it's kind of the what could you have done more? Like how early did this really happen? So that's why Trump is trying to clarify. In January, they were doing things here when a lot of people really weren't taking it seriously. I kind of been waiting for something like this to happen, a bio attack. You see that in a lot of films and stuff like that. So once this happened, it did kind of seem like, okay, is this what we've been waiting for here? Is this real? Is this really happening? So let's read on. Okay, so I also put this in here that there were no confirmed cases in the USA on January 11th of 2020. Even so, the CDC issued a level of travel notice for health. So we had 0 cases, President Trump continued. People want me to act. I'm supposed to close down the economy, the greatest economy in the history of the world, and we don't have 1 case confirmed in the USA. That's January 11th. On January 17th, the CDC began implementing public health entry screenings at 3 major U.S. airports that received the greatest volume of passengers from Wuhan at my instructions. There was not a single case of the coronavirus in the United States, and the fake news is saying, oh, he didn't act fast enough. Well, you remember what happened. Because when I did act, I was criticized by Nancy Pelosi, by Sleepy Joe Biden. I was criticized by everybody. In fact, I was called xenophobic. On January 21st, President Trump explained the CDC activated an emergency operations center as well. All right, so let's go and let's continue on here. Back into the focus mode. Okay. So on January 21st, President Trump explained the CDC activated an emergency operated center, and there was just 1 case, 1 person. But by January 31st, there were 7 reported cases in the United States with 0 deaths. President Trump issued a state travel restriction from China. So what did I do? President Trump asked the press in the briefing room. I issued travel restrictions on that date, even though nobody died, and I got brutalized over it by the press because I was way too early. I shouldn't have done it. Brutalized by the press. But sort of I've been brutalized for the last 4 years. I used to do well before I decided to run for politics, but I guess I'm doing okay because to the best of my knowledge, I'm the president of the United States, despite the things that are said. So then first mandatory quarantine in more than 50 years, we did. First mandatory in 50 years. But in February, Nancy Pelosi said we should come to Chinatown. This is late February. Come to Chinatown. We think it's very safe. Come here. Let's all have a big parade. Chinatown parade, probably referring to San Francisco. And that's it. But I took this action early. And so the story in the New York Times was a total fake. It's a fake newspaper, and they write fake stories. And someday, hopefully in 5 years, when I'm not here, those papers are all gone out of business. Because when I'm not here, those papers are all gone out of business because nobody's going to want to read them. But now they like them because they write about me. So that's the press briefing. Obviously, he had some issues. So then we are going to, I think we'll stop this one now. And next time we'll come back and talk a little bit more about Rand Paul and him testing positive on April 13th, 2020. But for now, I want to thank everybody again for joining me here for episode number 8. And we will continue on. If this channel gets shut down, if the content gets taken off, we'll just move it somewhere else. I have moved it to Rumble, to my Rumble channel, Greg Fernandez Jr. I am on Rumble, haven't really promoted that much yet, but I am on Rumble, moving a lot of the stuff that you find on this YouTube channel. I'll be moving all of that over to my Rumble channel, including the Bohemian Grove stuff, the Philip Marshall data, JFK, anything like that, 911, all of my music as much as I possibly can. But the goal is to, now that I have it all backed up, to get it onto other platforms. And hopefully it'll stay on YouTube, but if not, that's okay, because I'll be back. So God bless you all. And until next time, hope you have a great day.